Welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation, Advancing Ethics Through a Newcomer Research Library. Before we begin our presentation today, we would like to begin with an acknowledgement that N4 is hosted at CHIO, which is located in Ottawa, Ontario. Ottawa is built on unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. The peoples of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia, and we honor them and this land. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. We also honor all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. My name is Colleen Drake. I am N4's Project Engagement Coordinator, and I will be hosting and moderating today's presentation with my colleagues and co-host, Andrew Tomeyer, Education Coordinator, and Mariah Maddock, Team Lead Knowledge Generation and Mobilization, who will be monitoring the Q&A box today. I am now pleased to introduce you to today's presenters, Amanda Koyama and Amanda Weightman. Presenters, I am going to ask you to turn on your video as I introduce you. Welcome and thank you. Amanda Koyama is the Director of Strategic Engagement for Calgary Catholic Immigration Society, a nonprofit organization that offers settlement and integration support and services to all immigrants and refugees in Calgary and Southern Alberta. Amanda has spent most of her professional career in the public sector with a focus on access and engagement. With more than 15 years of leadership and consulting experience that involves process design, knowledge mobilization, facilitation, and building and maintaining strategic partnerships, Amanda is often solicited to provide board and committee leadership in varying networks. Our second presenter is Amanda Weightman. She is a founding partner and principal researcher at Habitus Consulting Collective, a community-based research and evaluation firm. In this role, she supports nonprofit organizations to understand social issues, build evidence-based programs, and demonstrate impact. Much of Habitus's work is in the immigrant serving sector and in supporting mainstream institutions to enhance cultural responsiveness. Amanda is passionate about creating a more just and equitable society that celebrates and makes room for diverse contributions. She holds a master's in sociology from Concordia University in Montreal. Today's session is being recorded and we will upload to our N4 platform. We will share this with you as soon as it becomes available. Should there be any technical issues during this presentation, we will inform you with details for an alternate makeup session. Before we begin today's event, I would like to take a moment to introduce you to our platform. These features will help and enhance our experience. As usual, throughout today's session, we invite you to write your questions in the Q&A window. We know that sometimes many of you might have the same questions as others and be interested in a particular response. So today you have the option of upvoting a question. So please upvote questions you're interested in hearing the answer to, and we will prioritize those questions we pose to the speakers first at the end of our presentation. We have also opened the chat for you to ask our presenters today questions during the presentation and participate in this very interesting discussion. With that said, let's jump right into today's presentation, and I will pass the virtual podium over to our presenters. You can take it away. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Colleen, and thank you to all of you who have chosen to join us for this hour of your day. We appreciate it. And as Colleen mentioned, the chat is open because Amanda and I generally don't like to talk at you. We prefer not to talk at you for an hour. So we'd love for you to jump in and engage whenever you have a thought or a question or a concern. And we're grateful to Colleen and Andrew for keeping an eye on that for us. So I'm just going to get this up. and get started. So as mentioned, yeah, Amanda and I both are from Calgary. So I live, work, and play on Treaty 7 territory. I am a born and raised Calgarian. My mother is an immigrant from Hong Kong. My father is Japanese Canadian. He was born in an internment camp in interior BC. Amanda, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Amanda Weightman. Nice to meet you all. Also here in Treaty 7. And I think for myself, just reflecting last night on sort of the land we're on and a lot of the work Amanda and I are doing around ethics and the conversations we'll be having today, I invite you to think of, reflect on your own sort of ways of knowing. And I think we have a lot to learn from Indigenous ways of knowing in terms of how and leadership we can follow in terms of how to sort of practice research in more ethical ways. So invite you to sort of hold that concept as we move forward, and look forward to chatting with you all.
Colleen did a quick recap on here, so I'm not going to spend much time, but we're a very large settlement organization here in Calgary. For those of you that may be unfamiliar, we work from Calgary to Southern Alberta, and we're a very large organization, which is relevant to this particular conversation because we hold very unique data sets. So in terms of research and data, we're a bit of a gatekeeper for certain populations, which puts us in a position to do this kind of work. And so we'll speak a bit more about that during the hour.
And again, thanks, Colleen, for a great introduction. I represent Habitus Collective. We're a research evaluation firm based in Calgary here. As mentioned, a lot of our work over the last decade has been in the resettlement sector here in Calgary and throughout the country. We've always really positioned ourselves around work that's, working on equity and also working on systems change. And so Amanda and CCIS has been a long time client. I've done lots of work with them over the years, but together we both are always sort of grappling with the systems change work. And it's together through the unique perspective that both of us sort of have on research, being that we're working from a community perspective that, led us to a lot of the conversations amongst ourselves and with our colleagues that have led to the work we're going to share with you today. So thanks again for joining.
Go ahead.
Okay, so a couple of questions. These are questions that we started with, and as I said, in chatting with colleagues in the community, some of the questions we sort of asked. And so I don't think we're going to do this as a formal poll, but we can just sort of rhetorically throw these questions out there and invite you to consider them. And so one is, how many of you, in particular, those of you who are working like myself as consultants or perhaps as, service providers, have research that's sort of sitting somewhere on your computer or somewhere on your desk. And this could be an evaluation report, maybe an infographic that you've developed or an engagement you've done with community that's sort of sitting within your organization and nowhere else. Another question is, if you're an academic in particular, or you've supported academic research, is that research sitting in a paywall in an academic journal? Is it something that's accessible? Or how many of you, go ahead, Amanda. Yeah.
Well, and as a service provider who's worked with a researcher, provided access to client populations, how often have you seen those results, or how often have they been communicated back to you? And then you were able to use them to inform programming or future services or funding. I don't feel like I need to see the answer from all of you to say this is a low percentage of people, because this is how we got to where we are today. Is like sort of it was a bit personal in terms of like our own, what we were seeing, what we were observing, what we're experiencing, and then we took it out into the world to see if it was a similar shared experience amongst both academics and service providers. So we'll give you a quick little story summary of how that happened, and it was, again, like it was a bit of a corner of a desk project, but really also more of a passion project for Amanda and myself to see, is this a thing? Is this a thing? It's definitely a thing with both academics and service providers. And it was really around the need to democratize knowledge, honestly. It was a need to bridge the gap between academic knowledge that is traditionally the only type of knowledge seen as evidence, and then community-based knowledge, which SPOs have in spades. But maybe there's no gateway for these two to meet, and there are wildly different accountability systems. And so this Newcomer Research Library, of which we are talking about today, was our solution, possible solution to this problem we identified. However, it launched in October of last year, so it's still new. it's always iterating, and opportunities like this, which is, we got this out of a presentation at Metropolis. So we're very grateful to Andrew for coming to that presentation and then bringing us here, because every time we speak about it publicly, there's someone that has something to add, someone to refer us to, has some thoughts about it. So this is really a good opportunity for us to sort of keep iterating and learning from our colleagues in the space and people doing similar things, because we're not wanting to duplicate anything that already exists, but it seems to be addressing a unique challenge of elevating or amplifying community-based knowledge, as opposed to just being a repository of academic knowledge. That's sort of the sweet spot we're going for here.
So this work started out, as we said, with some of these informal conversations we were having with groups who are saying, yeah, you're right, we did have some research going on and we haven't seen the results of that. Or no, we can't get access to research. And so we, CCIS had a MyTax placement, which is, for those who don't know, it's essentially a doctoral student who gets placed with your organization to do some, research attached to a very practical need. And so we had that person do some original data collection to actually sort of test this hypothesis that we were informally sort of developing around how research was happening in the settlement sector in particular. And so we interviewed, I think, 5 academics in the province who were known to be, real leaders, producing a lot of research on immigrants and newcomers in Alberta specifically. And we also talked to 12 SPOs in Calgary and Edmonton and some of the places in between to get their perspective as well. And so what we heard from folks is at the front lines that, yeah, research wasn't accessible. And that was for a number of reasons. Yes, sometimes it was paywalled. Sometimes it's the jargon, the academic language, the length of these articles made it not something that was easy to sort of navigate, to steward through, or to sort of read through in the ways that are needed at the front lines. A lot of organizations did say, yeah, we are engaged in research, but really only insofar as we are in access to populations. So we found in general, service providing organizations were often, really just access point bridges to community, but they weren't being really meaningfully engaged as partners in the research, which we'll talk more about that. We also had this researcher pulled everything they could find that was an academic publication or a research publication that was available online in the past 5 years that was basically the intersection of Alberta and newcomers or immigrants. Just to sort of, at that time, we were just thinking to see what are the topics being researched, how much of this is accessible. Indeed, half of the research was behind a paywall, only half of it was publicly available. And we did find that there were certain populations that were over-researched, in particular, migrant workers or temporary residents, as well as refugees. And not to say there aren't important issues to research, but it was disproportionate, to the amount of folks we have arriving. And likewise with topics, I think 25% of the research was on health, but many of these other work areas, children and youth or employment that are found align with the service areas weren't necessarily represented in the research. And then a lot of research was just very, very niche, not necessarily something that the nonprofit immigrant serving sector would be sort of using in program design, for example, or interventions. And so in talking to service providers around what their research needs were, the kind of information they needed, the timeliness, the accessibility of information, how they wanted to be involved, as well as what academics who also had good intentions and were really trying to figure out ways to work better with community. We just realized there was, like Amanda already mentioned and alluded to, there are these different accountability structures, different timelines at play, different sort of pulls, but everyone, there was an appetite to solve it and sort of do it better. And what we also found is that for the most part, these immigrant serving agencies are not mobilizing their evaluation reports or some of their original research or engagements with community beyond themselves, their own team, and perhaps to funders. And so that information wasn't necessarily getting moved around the sector, but folks were saying, yeah, we're doing really good research. We're doing a lot of data collection. Our methods are sound. It's just not going through an academic ethics approval, but it's not to say it's not valid and reliable information. And certainly it's much more timely and sort of real time. So we thought, well, that's interesting that, outside of sort of your umbrella agencies, for example, a lot of this information wasn't something that was becoming publicly accessible, even though it's really relevant and timely info, and including with data sets, like Amanda mentioned with CCIS. So those were some of the problems that definitely came out, which is what led us to come to the library. And really at this time, we were still thinking only about the ethics of research. And we were thinking about ideas like an ethics board or an ethics framework, community-based, principles or research agendas. But what we had done is, as I mentioned, pulled all the research we could find in the 5 years previous, which was at that time, 2015 to 2019. And so we had 106 academic articles that we'd sort of coded and pulled out key findings from, and we thought, oh, perhaps we can do something with this, which is what led to the library. So Amanda, I'll let you say more about this.
Yeah, I just feel the need to emphasize, because I know, well, if I was in the crowd on the other side of this screen, I'd be like, oh, well, this exists in all these different places. And it's true. Like, there are repositories of academic lit and research in several places, like IRCC sends a research with, like there's lots of avenues in order to get research, but it's the stewardship of that knowledge, and more importantly, the community-based knowledge that we are emphasizing through this research library. And people in lots of conversations we have, people are always curious, sort of like what it takes to get this going. And honestly, like a good chunk of time is around leveraging your relationships in the sector, because in order to get the community-based knowledge, you need to have relationships with SPOs, and then sort of have those conversations and figure out how to reduce the barriers for them to contribute their knowledge to a space, because the academics are thrilled. They're thrilled to have a space for knowledge mobilization. They're thrilled to have access to topic specific stuff. They're thrilled to have access to community-based knowledge, but it's the SPOs, I think, that need a bit more support and reduced barriers to be truly contributing at a level that would be somewhat equal, not exactly equal, to academics. And the library itself holds no value without community-based knowledge. So this is where we are at this moment, is that we've had lots of conversations with our partners and colleagues in this space, but it's around the socialization of what that looks like. How can we help you, and how can we make this an ongoing site for that type of experience and knowledge? Because as we see, I feel like I can speak for lots of people when we say, this is how the funding is established. So no one's gonna disagree with me on this, is that, we get funded to do a thing. I think we're getting better at getting evaluation as a budget line item in the thing. But sometimes it happens at the beginning, sometimes it happens at the end to ensure that we did the thing. And then we submit the evaluation report to the funder, or the mandated report to the funder, and then we move on to the next thing. So there's just lots of knowledge being lost. So we're trying to just push this into the top use and learn arrow over there, because I always think a really good example is in 2016, when the Syrians arrived, like research dollars flooded down, and there was so much research being done on Syrians in 2016. And then in 2019 or 2020, when the Afghans arrived, I thought, how many people are using what we learned from the Syrians with the Afghans? I'd be curious to know. And I'm not sure that it was even a possibility, or like how we would even apply that, other than like experientially and anecdotally within our own organization, but like formally from top down.
Yeah. And as an example, often depending on the publication cycles and approval cycles of academic journals, can easily be 5 years from the time the study's done to when it gets published. And, when you're in this sector working on the front lines, there's a lot of waves of people and learnings that could be applied, but when the research isn't available. And so we have, through our work, seen there's movements in, more community-oriented research briefs being submitted along the journey of research. So we don't only have to wait for that one big end product. And so that's, one of the partners we've worked with in this work, and we'll share more about who else we've chatted with, is the ethics department at University of Calgary, who's been very supportive in, sort of thinking about ethics, not just in terms of the design of the research, but also the knowledge mobilization. And knowledge mobilization plans are there, but nobody's really holding researchers accountable to those knowledge mobilization plans. And so this library on one hand is a tool to make sure very, simplified, immediate findings can be shared rather than waiting for academic publications. Like Amanda said, it's also to make sure, that service providers can share the knowledge they're developing, and that is, evidence is sort of more accessible.
And with the reference to the sort of unique data sets and the size of our population, CCIS is, I should know this, but it's like we're over 40 years old. So there's tons of knowledge and expertise and information that we hold. And so I don't know one service provider that isn't sort of tired of hearing from a researcher at the 11th hour to ask if they can get a letter of support or access to clients. And so this, and it's becoming increasingly more prominent. And so this was a result of just like not being valued as an actual partner or an actual holder of knowledge, which traditionally I think we were expected to just kind of play well in the sandbox and then give you what you need because in the name of research. But I really think that minimizes the role of the SBO. And so it went from academic to client and just didn't sort of focus on this. And, we always also use the example of it's actually unethical to ask brand new people when they just arrived how they feel about their experience, and to ask them like, in your journey, what happened? And I always say, like, we determine their journey. We get them off the plane and determine their journey. So you can ask them, but like, it's not really a fair question. And so not leveraging SBOs in your research design, I think is at a loss for both research and the SBO. And so the library allows service providers to position themselves as a resource partner, as it says here, practical end users of knowledge. And we do have unique data and data sets and client populations. And so this is a really good example of, again, during COVID, obviously, more research dollars and very relevant, very important ones. And COVID is great because it gives you a time, like it was a really compressed timeline. Like they needed to know stuff right away. So that was beneficial. And there was a really good example from a public health research grant that wanted to speak to clients about vaccines. Like they wanted to go in and speak to clients about vaccines and what happened in this and that. And we said, well, we have that data. Like we don't need to go burden the client again because we already have that data. So like stop bothering the clients for information that already exists. And so the other part of this is to reduce the burden on the client. And so with that researcher and through that grant, we were actually resourced as a partner. And we said, if you connect us as a partner, we'll mine the data for you. We'll steward the data for you and interpret it for you, as opposed to you having to go out to clients. And so that's what happened. And so it was beneficial to both, mostly importantly, our clients, and positioned us well within the project. Did you add anything to that, Amanda?
Yeah, so I think again, when we start thinking of this all from an ethical perspective and a sort of a more, I guess, radical approach to ethics, university ethics boards, which are very important, it's about a minimum baseline of what is ethical. And what we, would hope is that service providing organizations, and partly with this library as a tool to understand what topics are researched or not researched, can help service providers feel a little more empowered to advance a more ethical approach to research in the sector. And so with this example that Amanda's sharing, she's going, why are you going to ask people again, right? It's unethical to ask people to tell their stories repeatedly or to get data they've already given, especially when they may have arrived, 2 months ago. And that was another thing we noticed when we did the original scan of research, is that so much of the research is in the first 6 months from arrival, or certainly within the first 3 years from arrival. And again, I think this is to that point of Amanda saying, service providers are also sources of knowledge, and they have a lens on systems and themes. And so if we actually also included them as knowledge holders, perhaps by the time you talk to clients, you can ask, much more different and targeted questions because you've already got another sort of knowledge source there. And it's just not something that we noticed was happening often, is that service providers, and caseworkers were seen as knowledge holders in themselves. So yeah, I think this is another great example. And so another thing CCIS did during this complex of work that we were working on was developed a research screen. And again, this was Amanda and I going and having conversations and being like, how do you decide who gets to work with you? And really the answer for CCIS at that time and many of the other organizations we talked to is, well, yeah, we do it. There's this idea that like academics are good, ethical, and it's not to say that they aren't, but what's in it for the immigrant serving organization, especially when we often heard, well, they don't actually get the research results, and the research results aren't really, or research questions aren't really aligned to our clients. And then we also start to think about, well, maybe we're not even being culturally responsive to our clients, nor are we being compensated for our role in facilitating access and leveraging our relationships of trust, to have these clients participate. And so CCIS developed this research screen that now anytime an academic or a student reaches out to them for research, they do have a series of questions. It's about a two to 3 page document, similar to some of the questions you might see in an ethics form, but some others that CCIS has decided are important to them to make sure it's aligning to their strategic goals and what they know is culturally safe for clients. So Amanda, I'll let you speak a bit more to that.
Yeah, the research screen existed actually before the library, which is great because it was like sort of the start, and it was a touch point and actually a pause point for me to push back against the expectations of researchers and researchers in general. And what was fantastic is that in this process of me creating a lot of tension with researchers, the ethics board at the university, we were chatting and they invited me to join their ethics board, which is, I'm very grateful for that, because they're like, okay, great, come help us with this. And so at this point, even because we're big and life is complicated, sometimes I don't see all the research screens that come to CCIS. The ethics board will actually flag me with them to be like, have you talked about this and that? And so it was a starting point. One, like the 2 main points in the beginning were, how are they going to ensure cultural safety for our population, our clients? And what are the expectations on CCIS, which also allowed me to have a conversation in how are you going to compensate? Can you and how will you compensate CCIS as a partner in this project? Which you kind of need a thing to be able to have that conversation, or it's helpful. And then since then, the library has allowed us to also say, have you checked the library to see if there's 30 other research projects already done on this question that you're asking? Because, that should inform what you're doing. And do you commit to providing like your learnings at the end of your research before your publication date, so that we can get the learnings back into a centralized space? So this is, again, we only added those questions like obviously at the beginning of this year because it just started, but it's been well received, and I was quick to realize that academics also want to get their knowledge out. Mm-hmm. So having this as an opportunity has been very well received. And I've also learned, I've learned lots through this process, but like, it's actually not an academic, it's the bureaucracy. And like SSHRC, I learned if I'm like a whatever on SSHRC, I actually can't get paid as an SPO. So that's like a bigger systems problem, of which I always say like, well, I can't speak to SSHRC, academics need to speak to SSHRC. So I'm just kind of trying to push the problem all the way up. But this also lets us keep a kind of an inventory on what we're participating in and what we expect to sort of learn from, I guess.
Yeah, and I think this one question here around, what you're doing for clients that perhaps aren't English speakers is interesting, because I think in Amanda's work on the ethics board, this isn't a question that ethics is necessarily asking. But CCIS has started, to kind of say, well, if you're going to talk to this group of newcomers at this stage in their resettlement journey, you need to be doing this in first language. And that certainly is in the best interest of the researchers too, because you're going to get more reliable information. But it's interesting because it's without CCIS there to advocate for that. There's been instances where it's not something that would have happened, so I think that's really interesting. And Amanda, the next slide does show the questions you've built around
okay.
a research library. So one of the questions she's built in is if you've looked at the library, and as an example, again, the Syrians were, it was a big movement of people, and it was, a lot of attention was on that at the time. So understandably, there was a lot of research dollars going into it. But at the time we did that research scan, of the 106 articles we did in 5 years, 8% were on Syrians. So it was like this, so you go again, ethics are looking at the ethics of an individual research project, but what are the ethics, and ethical considerations around going back to the same group of people over and over within such a short period, and perhaps over researching them while they're also in this sort of vulnerable, state of early resettlement. And so, nobody's asking the question, those more meta, I suppose, ethical questions. And then also there's this question around, asking for a commitment to submit the research to the library, which certainly academics are very, very interested in.
And I think your example, Amanda, like and this is like, we're all learning together. And so research dollars are research dollars. And we were doing a RCV, routine childhood vaccination research, and they wanted to speak to parents of children, and said, yeah, no problem. Like, we can do that, whatever. We were being resourced as a partner. I'm like, oh, but you need to facilitate the workshops in first language. And they said, well, we don't have a budget for that. And I said, that's not my problem. Like, it's inequitable to do only focus groups in English. Like, that's unethical and inequitable, I would say. And so I think you have a good example of that one where it was different.
Yeah. And it was interesting because, again, just doing evaluation and research in this sector, it's something my team has been doing for 8 years, is first language research. Because we think it's, it's certainly important to engage with the community members that we talk to. And so with this research project, we ended up supporting some of the facilitation of the first language focus groups, which isn't just the facilitation, it's reviewing the research guides from a lens of cultural interpretation and how words may or may not sort of fit. As well as supporting the actual analysis of the data, because you can't just do the linguistic interpretation, you need to also do the cultural interpretation on that end. And this research group was really amazing because they were very open to the idea. And then having done some of their focus groups in English with newcomers, some who had, some basic fluency in English, but it wasn't their first language and their preferred language and the language they were most comfortable in. And then having the compare group of the ones they did with CCAS, where they did do it in first language, they realized that they were getting sort of like a lot of head nodding and yeah, everything's fine, and just a real lack of depth. Which I said, I think you're going to see there's something different, because even just the trust that's able to be formed when you have somebody communicating with your first language, your ability to actually get informed consent, and then your ability to actually get sort of meaningful, thoughtful contributions and more honest responses, depending on, a community's relationship with authority figures and things like this. There can be a tendency to sort of just, be agreeable and not necessarily critique the system. And so they saw very clear contrast in the type of information they were able to get, which was important because it was about making recommendations to improve a system. So I think this is a really great example of how CCIS is supporting a different approach to ethics in the sector. And I think, CCIS is open to sharing a document like this for others to see if it's something you're interested in doing as well.
Oh,
Okay,
so
now
we'll show you the library.
Yeah. So
are there any questions? Are there any questions or?
Oh yeah, we can answer any questions if there's anything immediate. I'm not seeing anything.
So we do have some questions coming in, but
okay.
We can host those at the end if you prefer to continue, or we can jump in with a couple now.
We can jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
Fantastic. I'll just pop up my camera so you can see me while I'm asking you. There we go. Excellent. So is it ethical to reach out to newcomer participants if you use a newcomer and immigrant community ambassador model that helps to create safe spaces for newcomers to share their stories?
Yeah. I mean, I think if it's ethical will depend on the individual one. I know there's some community groups that it can be a barrier having somebody within their own community because of, confidentiality can be harder to maintain. And that's important to recognize. But it is like for us, for my team as research, we'll often use a model like that where you're sort of brokering into communities via a community member. It's just less extractive, coming from the outside without, perhaps knowledge of what's appropriate within a community group. I do find that it's very, very helpful to have an ambassador. And, often what we do too is we train community members, who are, well connected in their communities to understand ethics and engagement and facilitation. So it can have the, a second outcome of capacity building within a community, right? To also have more of a voice in how research is happening in their community as well. And making sure it's culturally safe, emotionally safe, I think is really important. And we're not just predefining what we think is safety, right? Yeah.
Of course. Amanda, would you like to
add
anything to that? That's great. And then we did have a question related to service providers. So, how do we get service providers more involved in this work? You're just sort of commenting on that earlier, and how or what are some of the things that could do to involve them in this work?
Mhm.
Yeah, great question, which we'll get to more after. I mean, I said this yesterday, I like to say it every day, every time, but it's like, we're funded and kind of socialized. Like people like saving babies. So like we're focused on the front line. And so a lot of this is sometimes the invisible work that doesn't get prioritized or funded. And so I know a lot of SBOs don't have the resources necessarily to get involved, but I think the first thing is to basically empower yourself as an SBO to push back against academics, honestly, and to have a voice in that. Because SBOs have the knowledge, and so there's that. This is what we're hoping. This tool is what we're hoping to also how to engage SBOs, and also I don't know. There's so
Yeah.
many ways, but I don't know, Amanda. Did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting idea, even for training capacity building, but just understanding some of the basics of how research happens. Who is SSHRC? What are we talking about? What is ethics? What's included in ethics? What isn't? I think one group we've chatted with is the Jane Finch Community Partnership out of York University. And I won't go too much into what that is. It's a great group to check out. But part of what they've done is, again, knowing there's these different accountability structures, different knowledge structures, is academics are providing orientations to community around the basics of research, while communities are providing orientations to academics about the basics of their community. And you got to have this baseline knowledge, and it just helps bridge that gap a little bit too. And I think also I would really encourage, time I think is one of the biggest challenges for service providers, which again is why CCS has these questions around really what are you asking of us? And it does take time to support your recruitment. It does, leverage the trust and the value, we have with clients to do that work. And so at least, you need to second people's time to allow for that. And so I think that's something important to advocate for. And then I also encourage service providers, even when I do evaluations, they hold so much knowledge that sometimes people are not tapping into. And don't forget that you hold so much valuable information and insight that needs to be brought forward, especially from that unique lens on trends and systems that an individual from their individual experience likely will speak to, but they're not seeing it in that way. So I think it's such an important perspective that can be missed. And so I do encourage folks to learn some of the basics around research, and maybe it's an idea we'll come with out of this.
Yeah.
Just understanding some of the fundamentals can help you.
Yeah, that is good.
Be able to advocate,
Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. And with that, I'll encourage our attendees to put more questions in the Q&A box or the chat, and I'll hand the floor back to our presenters.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, so what we'll do is we'll now show you the library, because we've talked about the library, but we haven't showed you what it is. But again, we were always thinking about ethics and ethics and ethics, and this is in part a small piece of this ethics, in particular the ethics of knowledge mobilization. But we are hopeful it can also be a tool for supporting the ethics of sort of this democratization of knowledge, as well as the ethics of deciding research questions and what needs to be studied and what isn't studied. And because, as mentioned in that original scan of research, we had about 106 articles and research reports that we found, that we were just looking at to see how many are paid walled, how many work with community orgs, which groups are over-researched, which groups are under-researched. But then we were sitting there with all these research reports, and we thought, well, we should do something with them. And so, we built out this research library. And again, it took a while because we would just work with, practicum students or summer students when we had them. But at the same time, as we did this, we made a very clear guide for how to do it. And so we knew people wanted, from our original interviews, they wanted localized research. So we started only with Alberta on this population all in one place. And so it's not a repository of research. It's not an open access research repository like you might see. We'll always link you to where the original article lives, and whether that's behind a paywall or not. But what we have done is pulled out the abstract, as well as the key recommendations and key findings. with our perspective on, what from a service provider rather than an academic, or a community member might most need when they're writing a grant proposal or designing a program or doing some advocacy. And so really with that lens, we pulled out some of the key findings for you so you don't have to go read the original article, sort of doing this first bit of work for you. And so at this time, the library is just Alberta-based research, but we've documented a process and developed a process for it to easily be scaled to other provinces or nationally. So you'll see that filter by region that Amanda has. So what Amanda's been doing is kind of clicking on, we have, everything is just tag. So hopefully it's very easy to find things. She could type in, oh, this is good because we didn't have any LGBT stuff in the first. It was a gap, and so there's some research coming up. She could type Syrian, she could type CCIS, maybe show CCIS, Amanda, and then you'll see an example of them having shared some of their evaluation reports in here that otherwise may not be available to folks. And so a lot of really timely, relevant program-based knowledge and promising practices in that content.
And if you think about for SPOs, IRCC SPOs who know the call for IRCC, like the call is coming in the fall. We know that some of this information will not be accessible to you, or it's going to take so much time for you to go through it. And at this moment, it's only Alberta, so it's not going to help anybody nationally, but we're hoping this will encourage our colleagues across the country. And I always need to shout out Manitoba because they've been the most responsive with this library. And so it's just been a great partner. And then last week we had a meeting with N4 because they hold so much research and data as well. So we would like it to be a national space, but we can only focus on Alberta at this moment. So it doesn't take much though. And so I guess in this presentation also we're sort of saying, hey, who wants to be involved? It doesn't take that much, but like you really, a student could do it. It's just a matter of like a lit review and then learning the process, and it's not that complicated. So we're hoping to recruit some friends and neighbors in the provinces.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think we've learned that the localized provincial information is really, really helpful. But in terms to have a really comprehensive picture on all populations and issues, the provincial, set of knowledge isn't sometimes expansive enough. So I think having the searchability to localize, but to see sort of more national in scope will be really valuable. People can submit online. A lot of what we've been doing, I mean, to anticipate a question we get is it working? Are people using it? Our focus for these last 6 months since launching it has just been adding more articles. So we started with 106, we now have 250. We've been having lots of ongoing meetings and follow-ups with service providing organizations, umbrella organizations to, help make sure we're getting that data and those research reports showing up in here. We're trying to be very open about the kind of content that we can include. So we're trying to challenge ourselves to shift some of our ideas around what is, valid or valuable sort of evidence, while still making sure it is, it is research at the end of the day. And then we'll start moving into some user experience. We're thinking about different ways to sort of evaluate the effectiveness of the tool. And maybe it's not enough to fill all the gaps, we're hoping it fills, and we may have to take it further we keep saying, now we got to mobilize our knowledge mobilization. Yeah. You've got the tool, but we still have to get it out there. Certainly there's been a lot of interest, which has led us to this conversation with you all here today. There's a lot of groups out there trying to solve for the same problem. So this slide shows some of the folks we've been meeting with and having these conversations with to see how we can coordinate our efforts to make sure, this really timely information is available to those who need it.
I'm just being mindful of time, and so I want to get to the data. So I just wanted to pop this up because we have had some great conversations with folks at all these organizations, and I realized, like, every time we have this conversation, I said to Amanda, I'm like, oh, I realized, okay, what we need is a staff member. That's what we need behind this thing. So that's actually what's restricting us at this moment. But at least we have some great ideas, great partners. And I'm actually, I'm really hopeful that one day we'll have a partner in a different province, and that will help. Like, if we actually have another province partner, we'll be able to learn from them and sort of see how that works, and see what's actually possible and what's tangible. So that's a call to action for anybody on the call who might be interested in joining with us. It's it's hard for Matt and I to speak about research and ethics without speaking to data. We're both quite data focused, and so and in conversations with research and researchers, inevitably informing the cultural safety and research design will fall to data collection. And very similar to the example I showed before about how you're using the data, how you're stewarding the data, why are you overburdening the client collecting data that we already hold? And so there's lots of questions around that. So we do a lot of work on data equity as it ties to equity and also as it ties to research. And so these are some of the challenges that we've seen over and over again, both within organizations and within systems and academic projects. So did you want to speak about that at all, Amanda?
Yeah, I know. I'm like, how do we in 5 minutes go through this?
Yeah.
And I think it is just to say, like, there is, I think one of the pieces we'd like to build out in this library is some of the work we've been doing around data equity, knowing that data, and we're hearing a lot of conversations about race-based data and data desegregation, which are really important for advancing our goals towards equity. But data has, like research and very positivistic research in the past, has had harm on communities. And so we're all grappling with this, right? And so and again, it's another one where there's lots of data out there and there's lots of open access data sites showing up, but it's the stewarding, like who has the capacity and the time and the know-how to sort of steward their way through these data sets. So these are bits that we're also kind of thinking through and working through and would like to integrate into what you see in the library a little bit.
Same. It's just always like an ongoing conversation with the segregated data. So I can go back now. I just wanted to get.
Yeah. And we can, maybe it's a whole other president. We're trying to.
Yeah, just wanted to like get it in there.
Yeah.
Do you want to speak about the inclusion process?
Yeah. So for those who are interested in perhaps submitting anything to the library, and originally we were looking at only Alberta based, but knowing we're going to expand now, we'll take submissions for anything and at least hold on to them for when we do scale nationally. And we're kind of going, what do we define as research? And so we're trying to, like I said, sort of open the definition. And really, if we have to tighten the definition, we'll tighten the definition based on the kinds of things we start to see. But as long as it's, authored by some kind of reputable source, reputable organization, again, we're not here to validate the quality of the research that's in the library, but we'll at least sort of go through these main checkpoints that, it is coming from a reputable source. That there is some outline of a methodology that was used to determine findings. So again, just loosely, it's research because methods have led to like systematic gathering of some kind of data to get to the findings and recommendations that are made. And that it serves the purpose ultimately of better understanding and improving, the inequities faced by newcomers and the outcomes for newcomers. We'll always sort of be providing or focusing on recent content. But as we have capacity and time, we'll dig more into historical. There's lots of great, research that's not as recent out there. That's important. But within the definition, it can be evaluation reports. It can be community engagement summaries. It could be an infographic. So again, we're trying to help community orgs or ethnocultural groups realize that, information they have on their communities and research they have, from a more grassroots perspective can be included in this space, and it wouldn't be included in an academic journal, right? So, and then the reader can decide for themselves, the quality of that evidence as evidence. But we'd like to challenge folks to, include that information as important information when we make decisions about communities and how to serve them.
And as you can see, there is a contribute page on the research website where you can actually like kind of narrow it down, but you also can just email us the whole document. We're trying to reduce barriers as much as possible. So if it's just as simple as like opening the folder on your desktop and emailing us a bunch of reports, that's awesome. We'll do the heavy lifting after that point, because we see that's the information you want to share. So that's that, and that was after speaking with SPO, sort of like what's most likely going to have them engage, and what do they need in order to engage. So that's where we are right now. Yeah, it's obviously I'm biased and advocate for the use for community service providers more than anybody else, but really it is for everybody.
Mhm.
It should be for everybody, at least, I guess.
And a lot of our submissions to date that have just come through that contribution page have been from students who have master's theses or, dissertations from their PhD that aren't published anywhere. But these are also often the folks that are reaching out to the immigrant serving agencies to say, hey, can we do some research? And so again, it's a type of research that has a tendency not to be mobilized back into academic spaces or community spaces. And so, but again, students are quite eager to get that information and that hard work available. And so, a lot of those are things that we're adding to this library as well.
So I think we've kind of mentioned all of these things as we're moving forward, but this is sort of where we're hoping to go, is expanding, incentivizing. Yeah. We need to make it, once it's so popular that everyone needs it, then we'll have to look at incentivizing the site. And we are going to, you can see on the site, there is a sort of a tab for data equity where, like, again, there's so many great things happening. There's so many great things. There's so many great people, so many great orgs. And so we want to sort of customize a bit of a, if this is what you're doing, these are the people you can talk to sort of page, and share the work that we do and what we see, because we keep seeing a lot of demand for data equity, what we would call data equity work across the board. So I think it's just going to keep growing. The site, which we don't have time to, but there is the site summaries on the back end. We are using AI for the research summaries, which we're investigating, more ways to create efficiencies that way with the site. But as you all know, also that's a quick and ongoing learning curve. And for anyone who wants to get involved, there's lots of ways you can go about it. We'd love to hear from anybody and everybody. General thoughts, and we'll stop in a couple minutes just in case people have thoughts or questions or comments they want to add, because we learn best, like we learn really through these kinds of presentations to general public, and great thoughts come from objective people and people from the outside. But of course, we'd love anyone to join, to partner so we can expand the library, share your feedback on searchability, usability, and of course submit content and use the library. The first way to get involved is to use the library. Yeah.
And does it help or does it not? Is there more we need to do? And I think that's one of the things in the last slide where we're realizing, okay, we have to do even more to help folks even steward their way through this. And so we may create some content briefs, some sort of lit reviews that are, easily accessible for folks. And so those are some of the things we're thinking through now, is what do we need to do to take it one step further? And so any thoughts you have, is very, very helpful as you try to use it. And then here's our contact information. Please reach out at any time if you want to know more about contributing, if you want to know more about using it, if you want to know about scaling it and what it takes to actually get this up and running. It took us a long time because we were doing it very piecemeal. But we sort of track the time and the resources required, and it doesn't have to take years at all. And we would provide support with that process and all the materials that we've sort of documented, and to make sure it can scale successfully and consistently. So we're sort of ready and eager to support anyone interested in taking that on for their province.
Or please reach out. I feel like every time we do this, someone at the end says, oh, you need to talk to blah, blah, blah. And so if you feel like there's someone we need to talk to, we would love to talk to them. So please feel free to recommend that as well. I do, in case there are questions, I'm just gonna.
Yeah.
Thank you both for that very informative presentation and for sharing the details on the tools that you have available. I can see that we are definitely going to have a spin-off webinar from this. We had so much to discuss and some fantastic questions coming in. So I will ask the ones that we have, and if we don't have an opportunity to get to all of them, we can take those offline with our presenters. So let's dive into those questions. So what are future plans for the Newcomer Research Library?
Trying to find a partner, expanding and honestly, it's very deliberate. It was very deliberately not funded because I just really didn't want prescriptive funding from any traditional funders, I'll say, without naming a traditional funder. But we're getting to a point where it's going to need resources and a staff person. So we're going to have to kind of strategize around that. We're always going to expand it, like keep adding knowledge, and hopefully expand it across regions.
Yeah. And then evaluate the usability. That's a piece too we're starting to think about is, you know, how do we define success, and what do we do if it's not getting used, right? We've just been really focused on getting word out there. But again, it requires, you know, a lot of engagement and socialization and reminders for people, I think, to actually be using it, and let alone us find out if it is functional and it has the utility it's designed to. So that'll be part of our focus over the next year or so as well.
Fantastic. We look forward to seeing that expansion in action. Will there be shifts in topics and its respective research that will be focused on or based on priorities of the current times?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, and I meant to mention this earlier, after COVID or during COVID, the focus on public health was wildly magnified. And so we are actually part of, I would say, like 6 or 7 public health research projects because of all the reasons we know. And the library itself is really beneficial for research projects who ask specifically for knowledge mobilization tools, which I think all of them do now. So it's become like a part of the research grant ask to be like, yeah, we're going to use this as a knowledge mobilization tool, blah, blah, blah. And so there might be a very specific public health research tab at some point, because I feel like that is where the research has been shifting. But I guess the answer really is it'll depend on who contributes. Yes.
Yeah, like an example, and the topics and categories you see there are emergent from what there's literature on rather than the other way around. And so, for example, when Amanda was scrolling through, there was one on 2S LGBTQ. When we did the scan in 106, there is nothing on that topic at all.
There was very few. There was a couple.
But even though we know it was already something happening in the sector and discussions happening, probably a lot of the evidence base was environmental scans or secondary research, and only now are we seeing the academic work come up. So when you don't see the priorities reflected, we want you to start asking these questions around why aren't they? You know, is it just that they haven't been published yet? Is it that academics aren't realizing this is a priority, you know, at sort of the ground level? And what can we do to fill those gaps, right? Or is it that information is out there, but it's not showing up in here because of, you know, the format it's in or where it lives? So, yeah, will the categories change? It's kind of like a ground up question.
Hopefully, like in a perfect world, yes, because they'll see that these categories have already been addressed.
Yes.
And they should be asking different research questions.
Yes. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you both. And I think I have time for one more question before we do our wrap up. Does the library include specifically newcomer research that's new, systematic reviews, case studies, or a combination of all various research activities?
Yeah, we wouldn't want all of those would be in scope. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Well, with that, thank you very much, Amanda Koyama and Amanda Weightman, for taking the time to participate in today's discussion. And obviously, many thanks to our audience for joining us and engaging with us today. You're welcome to join us again at our upcoming events. If you missed any or part of today's presentation or would like to watch this session again, we would post the recording to the N4 platform within the next week. We want to continue the dialogue this presentation has started, and we will be moving, as I mentioned, questions that we did not get a chance to today online to our moderated discussion forum called Meeting Place. We have invited our panelists to respond to those questions there. We have also curated several resources mentioned in today's presentation, and you'll be able to find those in our resource toolkit. The link will be shared with you, and if you need to, go to newcomernavigation.ca for all of these resources and learning opportunities. And following today's session, you'll be invited to complete a survey on your feedback. And these surveys are obviously important to us to have the responses. And we kindly ask that you follow the link to complete the survey. And with that, I would really like to give the last comment to our presenters so that they have an opportunity to share their last thoughts.
I just want to thank everybody. I feel like it's a big ask these days, and everyone's so busy to take an hour out of your day. So just thank you for joining us and for all your great questions and for being interested, basically.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks to everyone. And thanks for your thoughtful questions as well. Look forward to the continued dialogue and work together. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And we look forward to future collaborations.
Thank you.
Thanks, Colleen and Andrew. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.